Let's dive into some epic old tales from way back when, from places you might have heard of, like Sumer, which is in today's Iraq, and Greece. Gods and giant monsters take on the roles of the heroes and villains, just like in comic books. These stories are packed with action, focusing on the never-ending fight between the good and bad guys. So, in ancient Sumer, folks believed in this really eerie place called Kur. Imagine it as the scariest haunted house you can think of, where ghosts chill out. This place was under the rule of a goddess named Ereshkigal, who was kind of a big deal there. Then there were the Babylonians, neighbors to the Sumerians, who had a pretty similar concept but called their spooky place Irkala. Their belief was that when someone died, their soul had to make a trek to this underworld. But it wasn't easy peasy. They had to pass through 7 gates, each guarded by a tough guy, making sure only the right spirits got through. These guards, with names like Neti, Gedu, Enugu, Ninkasi, Ninama, Belulu, and Dumuzi, were the underworld's security team. Dumuzi and his sister Geshtinana took turns keeping watch. In this underworld Kur, there was this amazing cow that could somehow save people, and a god named Nergal, who was the judge of the dead. It was like being in a spooky courtroom where they'd decide if you were more naughty or nice while you were alive. If you were on the naughty list, the afterlife wasn't going to be much fun for you. The Babylonians made these stories even more interesting by saying the underworld was stacked like a cake, with each layer having its own boss, and the dead souls had to face different challenges at each level. This concept is similar to what you see in Greek and Egyptian myths, where the dead go through a whole process like in Greek stories with Hades and being judged by Pan and Pluto. One of the coolest Babylonian tales is about Ishtar, the goddess of love and fertility. She went down to the underworld to save her lover Tammuz, but the underworld was tough on visitors. They made her give up her fancy clothes and jewelry to pass through. But Ishtar had some powerful friends up in heaven who helped her out, and she got a miraculous comeback to life. In the underworld, every gate had a specific purpose, acting as checkpoints to ensure that the dead didn't escape and received a fair judgment before moving on to the afterlife. At each gate, different gods took charge, each playing a role in deciding the fate of the souls. Neti, the first gatekeeper, was responsible for checking in the souls. Then, at the second gate, Gedu was busy with weighing hearts against a feather, similar to what you'd hear about with that Egyptian deity Sobek, who was posted at the third gate. Lumo, at another gate, would review the major events of your life. Shala, stationed at the fourth gate, tested your loyalty. Ninlil, at the fifth, evaluated your intelligence and wisdom. Nergal, at the sixth gate, judged your leadership qualities. And finally, Urush, at the last gate, made the final call on whether you were fit for the afterlife. In the stories from Sumerian and Babylonian cultures, the goddess ruling the underworld was a major figure, closely linked to Anu, the god of the sky, and Enlil, the god of the earth. She was viewed as a powerful and intimidating authority over the dead and other spirits. Then there's Osika, a high-ranking deity in charge of a group of very important souls known as Trans-Dryan snake gods, which sounds quite serious and important. In 1903, archaeologists discovered statues in Crete at the Minoan Palace of Knossos, which have become iconic in the study of ancient art. These statues depict women in an elegant manner, with exposed chests, holding snakes. There's speculation that Urasika might be related to these snake goddesses, suggesting a possible family connection, or at least a cultural link between them. Nishida was a guy who was all about the scary stuff, like the underworld and not being able to have kids. Was like a big snake or a dragon, which is pretty awesome because it means he's connected to the idea of starting over or coming back to life. If you know anything about the Greek god Asclepius or the Egyptian god Wadjet, Nishida is kind of on the same wavelength. His stories are all about nature, especially how plants dying and coming back to life is sort of a metaphor for his own adventures down under. Plus, he's linked to some of the earliest parties ever, with lots of wine and beer involved. So yeah, he was definitely the life of the party back in the day. Now let's switch gears to Ninurta, who's this amazing healer among the gods. If you're trying to find a modern comparison, think of her as the ancient version of a doctor, kind of like Hygeia from Greek mythology. Serpents, which might seem a bit scary now, were actually a big deal in terms of healing back then. Ninurta had a close relationship with Ishtar, who was all about love and also, strangely enough, war. Moving on to someone a bit more mysterious, Lilitu, or as some call her, the Phantom Maiden. She's got her toes dipped in both the living world and the underworld. She's often shown as this eerie owl or a bird that's more about the night and death, kind of giving off the vibe that she's a bit more intense than Inanna. There's this one tale where she's hanging out in a tree that has a snake at its roots, which could mean she's got some control over the underworld. Lilitu, along with Lilu, are mentioned in old stories as demons who were not exactly friendly to expectant mothers and infants, a theme that you can also find in Jewish stories. In Jewish folklore, Lilith is talked about as Adam's first partner, created just like him, from clay. And let's not forget about Lamashtu, who's pretty much the villain of Mesopotamian myths. Imagine the scariest monster with a lion's head, donkey's teeth, and bird's feet. Yeah, that's her. She's notorious for her hatred towards mothers and newborns. People often compare her to Lilith from Jewish mythology, or even Medea from Greek stories. These creatures were seen as super powerful and sometimes evil, like Tiamat in Mesopotamian myths, who was all about chaos, or Python in Greek myths, seen as evil. Even Chinese dragons had underworld connections. These creatures were like the ancient world's version of magic and mystery. Over in Babylonian myths, there's Tiamat, the goddess of the salt sea. She's usually shown as a dragon or serpent and is big on chaos and creation. There's a story where Marduk splits her in half to make the sky and earth. People see Tiamat in different ways, like a symbol of nature or a warning about chaos and disorder. In Greek stories, there's Ophion, a huge serpent or dragon who ruled the roost with Eurynome before Zeus and the gang took over. Ophion is sometimes linked to the world's creation. There's this thing called the Orphic egg in these tales. It's supposed to have the whole universe inside and gets opened by either Phanes or Ophion, who becomes Phanes. The egg, usually wrapped by a serpent, is all about life and death. Zeus had a massive showdown with Typhon, a giant monster in the early days. Zeus won and sent Typhon to Tartarus, a super deep and dark pit where he's chained up till the end of time. There's also this old Canaanite text about a demon king named Habu. After a wild party thrown by El, the king of the gods, Habu takes down El. El was drunk and got ambushed by Habu, who did some really nasty stuff to him. El ended up in the underworld but got brought back to life by Anat. Now let's talk about satyrs and goat demons in Greek and Roman myths. Picture this: a dude on top and a goat on the bottom, complete with horns. These guys were the life of the party, all about wine, dancing, and sometimes they stirred up a bit of trouble. Now, about demons. The word demon didn't always mean something scary. It used to just mean any divine spirit, but over time it got this bad reputation as something evil, the opposite of angels. And the word devil comes from the Greek word diabolos, which means accuser. It's interesting because these terms didn't really get into the whole good versus evil thing until Christianity popped up. This idea of good and bad gods isn't just a new thing. It's in old beliefs like Vedic and Zoroastrianism too. In Zoroastrianism, devas are the bad guys, but in Hinduism, they're the good guys. It's a cool example of how different cultures see the same things in totally different ways. The Greeks had their own family drama with the Olympians, led by Zeus, and the Titans, led by Kronos. They had this epic battle for control of the universe, and spoiler alert, the Olympians won. The word angel actually means messenger in Greek. This whole concept of good versus evil really took off with Christianity, but it's got roots in older myths, like the Olympians fighting the Titans. In Hinduism, there's this goddess named Kali. She's all about change and destruction, and is often shown with snakes and looking pretty fierce. She's linked to death and the underworld too. There's this story in the Bhagavata Purana where she brings chaos to the world after Krishna leaves Earth. These ideas trace back to ancient Sumerian beliefs about gods and monsters. Pham Wigman, an individual, created a chart illustrating that in these ancient narratives, monsters were perceived as nature's aberrations, whereas gods were considered the quintessential stable rulers. Wigman interpreted these stories as attempts to rationalize natural disasters through the actions of malevolent deities. Pan, the Greek god of nature, who was part man and part goat, was fond of music and revelry. However, he also embodied the concept of fear and, over time, transformed into a symbol of the devil within Christianity. This evolution demonstrates the complex and changing nature of myths. In the earliest Babylonian myth, a chaos serpent named Tiamat engages in a confrontation with Apsu. This narrative subtly resonates with the biblical story in Genesis, where a serpent tempts Eve, serving as a nod to the Babylonian legend. The motif of a chaos serpent in the underworld recurs in various myths, including Zeus's battle with Typhon and Prometheus's punishment by Zeus, and it is also present in the Book of Revelation. These ancient stories from regions such as Babylon and Sumer have significantly influenced religions like Christianity and Islam. Regardless of belief in these mythical entities, they form an integral part of our cultural history and continue to captivate us. Hence, a hearty acknowledgement to the ancient Sumerians and their monumental myths. Remember to like, subscribe for more myth-busting fun, and share your thoughts in the comments.